He's a complete failure. His little fitness business will never make real money. My daughter deserves someone with actual career prospects. These words were uttered by my mother-in-law, who had no idea about my hidden potential and what was about to unfold the very next morning. My name is David Chen. I'm 30 years old, and I run a boutique fitness coaching business called Elevate Wellness from a converted garage in Portland, Oregon. What cuts deepest isn't just the criticism itself, but the absolute certainty behind it. People who have never built a brand, never coached a single client, never turned passion into profit. Somehow they know exactly why my dreams are destined to crash and burn. Margaret Rodriguez had been broadcasting my inevitable failure to anyone within earshot for nearly 4 years. Today, at Sunday family lunch around her pristine dining table, she was performing her greatest hits once again. I had stepped outside to the patio to get some fresh air when her voice drifted through the sliding glass door. David thinks he can make a living playing personal trainer on Instagram. 4 years of watching him waste his business degree on this fitness fantasy, while my daughter works herself to death supporting them both. I stood there holding my iced tea, listening to my mother-in-law educate the entire family about my character flaws. I could hear my sister-in-law making sympathetic noises, agreeing that someone needed to talk sense into David. Margaret continued, "The man has no understanding of financial responsibility, no steady income, no benefits, no retirement plan. Just this delusion that he can turn workout videos into a real career. My daughter deserves better than this." I walked back inside, refilled everyone's drinks with a smile, and acted like I hadn't heard a single word. But something had crystallized in my chest, something cold and patient and absolutely certain. The truth was, I had signed acquisition papers with FitTech Industries 3 days ago. $15 million for Elevate Wellness, plus a 5-year consulting contract and equity in their new digital wellness division. The public announcement would drop tomorrow morning. But sitting at Margaret's table, watching her explain why I was destined for mediocrity, I decided that some people deserve to learn about success the hard way. My wife Jessica caught my eye from across the table. She knew something was different, but didn't know what. I hadn't told her about the acquisition yet. I wanted everything completely finalized before sharing the news. Now I had a different reason for keeping quiet. I wanted Margaret to have one more night of absolute confidence in my worthlessness. When we left that afternoon, Margaret patted my shoulder and said she hoped I'd find my direction soon. But tomorrow morning, everything would change. The drive home from Margaret's house was quiet. Jessica stared out the window while I gripped the steering wheel, replaying every word her mother had said. 4 years of this. 4 years of being treated like I was some kind of charity case that Jessica had foolishly taken on. What bothered me most wasn't Margaret's skepticism about the fitness industry. That was understandable. What destroyed me was her absolute certainty that I was the wrong man for her daughter. That I was fundamentally flawed as a provider, as a partner, as a person worth respecting. Margaret Rodriguez wasn't just some random critic. She was a retired bank executive who had built her wealth through decades of conservative investments and careful financial planning. She owned 3 rental properties in Portland's most desirable neighborhoods and served on the boards of 2 local charities. When Margaret spoke about money and career stability, people listened. She had raised Jessica to value security above everything else. Graduate from college, find a stable job with benefits, marry someone with a predictable income, buy a house in a good neighborhood, save for retirement. It was a solid plan that had worked perfectly for Margaret's generation. I represented everything that terrified her about modern career choices. I had taken my business degree, and instead of joining a corporation, I had started making fitness content online. Instead of climbing a traditional corporate ladder, I was building something from scratch in an industry Margaret viewed as frivolous. The irony was that I understood her fear completely. When I first started Elevate Wellness, I had the same doubts. Could someone really build a sustainable business around fitness coaching? Was I being naive about the long-term potential? Was I wasting time and money chasing an impossible dream? But Margaret had never asked about my business model or my revenue streams. She had never shown curiosity about how online fitness coaching actually worked, or what my client retention rates looked like. She had simply decided that anything involving social media and fitness videos couldn't possibly be a real business. For 4 years, she had treated my work like an expensive hobby that Jessica was patiently tolerating until I came to my senses and got a real job. Every family gathering included subtle suggestions about companies where she had connections, casual mentions of job openings that might suit someone with my background. The most painful part was watching Jessica navigate the tension between supporting her husband and keeping peace with her mother. She believed in what I was building, but she also loved her family and hated being caught in the middle of our unspoken conflict. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, Margaret would go to sleep completely confident in her assessment of my future. What Margaret didn't know, what nobody knew except me and the legal team at FitTech Industries, was that I had already won. 3 days ago, I had signed the most important documents of my life in a conference room overlooking downtown Portland. The acquisition papers were thick, filled with legal language that essentially translated to, "Congratulations, you've built something valuable." $15 million. The number still felt surreal when I thought about it. $15 million for a business that Margaret had dismissed as a hobby. $15 million for workout videos and meal plans and online coaching sessions that she thought were a waste of time. But it wasn't just about the money. FitTech Industries wasn't acquiring Elevate Wellness because they felt sorry for me or because they wanted to take a charitable gamble on a small business. They were acquiring it because my client retention rate was 94%, because my revenue had grown 340% in the past 18 months, and because I had built something they couldn't replicate internally. The negotiation process had taken 6 months. It started when FitTech's head of acquisitions reached out after seeing my business featured in Entrepreneur magazine. They were impressed with my approach to combining personalized coaching with scalable digital products. They wanted to integrate my methodology into their platform and expand it nationally. The initial offer was $8 million. By the time we finished negotiating terms, compensation structure, and my ongoing role with the company, the total package was worth $15 million over 5 years, plus equity in the expanded wellness division I would help lead. I had kept the entire process secret, even from Jessica. Acquisition talks could fall apart at any moment, and I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up prematurely. I wanted signatures on contracts and money in accounts before I started celebrating, but sitting in Margaret's dining room, listening to her explain why my business model was fundamentally flawed, I realized I had a different reason for maintaining the secret. I wanted her to have a few more hours of absolute certainty about my inadequacy. For 4 years, Margaret had positioned herself as the voice of reason in contrast to my unrealistic ambitions. She had been patient with my delusions, sympathetic about Jessica's situation, and confident that reality would eventually force me to abandon my fitness fantasy and find a real job. Tomorrow morning, when the press release hit the business news, that dynamic would be permanently reversed. But tonight, I wanted her to enjoy one last evening of being absolutely right about everything. I met Jessica 5 years ago at a coffee shop near Portland State University. She was finishing her degree in elementary education, and I was working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising agency while planning my escape into entrepreneurship. We talked for 3 hours that first day, about travel, about teaching, about what it meant to find work that actually mattered to you. Jessica had always wanted to teach, ever since she was a kid. She talked about education like it was a calling, not just a career choice. I talked about my dream of starting my own business, something that could help people improve their lives while giving me the freedom to work on my own terms. Jessica understood that drive in a way that most people didn't. She believed in taking calculated risks for the right reasons. Her family believed in security above everything else. Margaret had built her wealth through careful real estate investments and 3 decades of climbing the corporate ladder at Pacific Northwest Bank. She owned rental properties, served on nonprofit boards, and had never made a financial decision that couldn't be easily explained to an accountant. When Jessica and I got married 3 years ago, Margaret pulled me aside at the reception to discuss my long-term strategy. I explained that I wanted to build a fitness coaching business that could help people create sustainable, healthy habits without requiring expensive gym memberships or complicated equipment. Margaret nodded politely and suggested I consider applying for management positions at established fitness companies. "There's nothing wrong with having entrepreneurial instincts," she said, "but building something from scratch is incredibly risky. Why not gain experience working for someone else first?" It was reasonable advice from someone who had built her career through traditional channels. But it missed the entire point of what I was trying to create. I didn't want to manage someone else's vision. I wanted to build my own. Elevate Wellness launched 6 months after our wedding. The concept was straightforward. Personalized fitness coaching delivered through a combination of one-on-one video calls, customized workout plans, and a private online community where clients could support each other's progress. I wasn't trying to compete with big box gyms or expensive personal training studios. I was creating something for people who wanted professional guidance but couldn't afford $150 per session or didn't have time to commute to a gym. The first year was promising. I landed 8 clients through networking and referrals from Jessica's teacher friends. The revenue wasn't enough to replace my agency's salary, but it was enough to prove the concept worked. Margaret's questions about my progress always focused on when I planned to start looking for a real job. She never asked about client satisfaction or business growth metrics. She simply assumed that anything I built would eventually fail because I wasn't the kind of person who built successful companies. The idea for Elevate Wellness came from my own frustration with the fitness industry. I had spent years bouncing between expensive gym memberships, complicated workout programs, and fitness apps that promised everything, but delivered generic solutions that didn't fit my lifestyle. What I wanted was simple: personalized guidance from someone who understood my schedule, my goals, and my limitations. I wanted a coach who could adapt my workout routine when I was traveling for work, who could suggest meal prep strategies that actually fit my cooking skills, and who could help me stay motivated without making me feel guilty about missing a day. When I couldn't find that service at a price I could afford, I decided to create it myself. The business model was deliberately sustainable. Instead of trying to scale to hundreds of clients immediately, I focused on delivering exceptional results for a small group of people who were willing to pay premium prices for personalized attention. My background in marketing helped me understand how to position the service and communicate its value. My genuine interest in fitness and nutrition gave me credibility with clients. But the real differentiator was my willingness to treat each client like a unique person rather than a generic case study. I spent the first 6 months developing the coaching methodology, creating workout templates that could be customized for different fitness levels and life circumstances, and building relationships with nutritionists and physical therapists who could provide specialized expertise when clients needed it. The early clients were mostly referrals from friends and family members who knew I was passionate about fitness and trusted my judgment. They weren't necessarily looking for a revolutionary fitness experience. They just wanted someone reliable who could help them establish healthier habits without overwhelming them with complicated protocols. What surprised me was how quickly word spread. Clients started referring their friends, not because I was the cheapest option available, but because they were getting results and actually enjoying the process. They appreciated having a coach who remembered their preferences, adapted to their changing circumstances, and celebrated their progress without judgment. By the end of the first year, I had a waiting list. By the end of the second year, I was generating more revenue from Elevate Wellness than from my agency job. That's when I decided to leave the corporate world and focus on the business full-time. Margaret's reaction to that decision was predictable. She sat Jessica and me down for a family meeting where she explained the importance of steady income and health insurance. She offered to help me find positions at companies where she had connections. "There's nothing wrong with having a side business," she said, "but you need something stable to fall back on. What happens if this fitness thing doesn't work out?" I tried to explain that Elevate Wellness was already working out, that I had consistent revenue and growing demand for my services. But Margaret didn't see monthly coaching fees as real income, the way she understood salary and benefits packages. The second year of running Elevate Wellness full-time was harder than I had expected. 2 of my highest-paying clients moved out of state and canceled their coaching packages. Another client lost their job and couldn't afford to continue the program. Suddenly, I was scrambling to replace nearly 40% of my monthly revenue while also trying to expand my marketing efforts to attract new clients. The financial pressure was intense, and Margaret's suggestions about real jobs started feeling less like interference and more like practical necessity. Jessica was teaching elementary school, which provided health insurance and steady income, but her salary alone wasn't enough to cover our mortgage and living expenses. We had to dip into our savings to make ends meet, which made every family dinner with Margaret feel like a referendum on my decision to leave corporate employment. "I'm not saying I told you so," Margaret would say, "but maybe it's time to consider some backup options. The fitness industry is notoriously unpredictable." The worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. I was learning firsthand how vulnerable small businesses could be to client churn and economic fluctuations. When people faced financial pressure, personal coaching was often one of the first expenses they eliminated from their budgets. I spent months pitching to potential clients who liked my approach but couldn't commit to the monthly fees. I created lower-priced group coaching options and digital-only packages, but the revenue per client was significantly lower than my original one-on-one model. Margaret started forwarding job listings from companies in her network. "Just in case you want to explore some options," she would say. "There's no shame in pivoting when something isn't working." But something was working. It was just working slowly and inconsistently. My client retention rate among people who could afford to continue was exceptionally high. The testimonials and referrals were consistently positive. The problem wasn't the quality of my service. It was finding enough people who valued personalized coaching and could afford to pay for it. Jessica was caught in the middle of the tension between supporting my entrepreneurial ambitions and managing her mother's growing concern about our financial stability. She believed in what I was building, but she also worried about the stress I was putting on myself and our relationship. "Maybe you could look for contract work," she suggested after a particularly difficult month. "Not a full-time job, just something to provide more predictable income while you're building the business." It was a reasonable compromise, but it felt like admitting defeat. I had left my agency job specifically to focus on Elevate Wellness full-time. Going back to client work, even temporarily, would validate Margaret's belief that my business wasn't sustainable on its own. The breakthrough came during my 3rd year, but it took longer than anyone had patience for, especially Margaret. Everything changed when I started creating content for social media. Initially, I had resisted building a large online presence because I wanted to focus on providing high-quality service to a small group of clients rather than chasing viral content and massive follower counts. But I realized that sharing my coaching philosophy and workout techniques online could be a way to demonstrate expertise to potential clients while also providing value to people who couldn't afford personalized coaching. I started posting workout videos, nutrition tips, and motivational content on Instagram and TikTok. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 6 months, I had gained over 100,000 followers across platforms, and more importantly, I was getting inquiries from potential clients every single day. The social media presence transformed my business model completely. Instead of spending hours pitching to prospects who might not be ready to invest in coaching, I had a steady stream of people reaching out who were already familiar with my approach and excited to work with me. By the middle of my 3rd year, I had a 3-month waiting list for one-on-one coaching. I was generating more revenue than I had ever made in my corporate job, and I was able to raise my prices because demand consistently exceeded my capacity. That's when I started getting attention from larger companies in the fitness industry. Supplement brands wanted to sponsor my content. Fitness equipment companies wanted to partner on product development. And eventually, fit tech industries reached out about a potential acquisition. The initial conversation with fit tech was exploratory. They were impressed with my client retention rates and the engagement levels on my social media content. They wanted to understand how I had built such a loyal following and whether my coaching methodology could be scaled to serve their existing customer base. What started as a casual consultation call turned into a 6-month negotiation process. FitTech wasn't just interested in buying my business. They wanted to integrate my approach into their platform and expand it nationally under my leadership. Margaret's attitude during this period was fascinating to watch. She could see that my income had stabilized and grown significantly, but she still viewed my success as precarious because it was based on social media and online coaching rather than traditional employment. "It's great that things are going well right now," she would say. "But what happens if the algorithm changes? What happens if people lose interest in fitness content? You're building your entire livelihood on something that could disappear overnight." Her concerns weren't completely unreasonable, but they missed the point that I was building real relationships with clients and developing systems that could adapt to changes in technology and market conditions. What she couldn't see was that FitTech Industries was offering to acquire those same precarious assets for $15 million because they recognized the value of what I had created. The final negotiation session with FitTech Industries took place on a Thursday morning in their downtown Portland headquarters. I sat in a conference room overlooking the Willamette River, surrounded by lawyers and executives, reviewing documents that would change my life completely. The acquisition terms were more generous than I had dared to hope for when this process began. $15 million total, $8 million up front, $4 million over the following 2 years based on performance metrics, and $3 million in equity tied to the success of the expanded wellness division I would help develop. But the money was only part of what made this deal meaningful. FitTech wanted to scale my coaching methodology to reach hundreds of thousands of people who were struggling with the same fitness challenges my original clients had faced. They saw Elevate Wellness not as a small business with limited potential, but as a proven solution that could transform their entire approach to customer support and engagement. Michael Thompson from FitTech's acquisitions team walked me through the integration timeline and my role in the expanded organization. I would become director of personalized wellness, leading a team of coaches trained in my methodology and overseeing the development of new digital tools that could deliver customized fitness guidance at scale. "We've been looking for someone who understands how to combine high-touch coaching with scalable technology," he explained. "What you've built with Elevate Wellness is exactly what we've been trying to develop internally for the past 3 years." The validation was overwhelming. For 4 years, I had been defending my business model to people who saw online fitness coaching as a frivolous hobby. Now a major company was paying $15 million for the exact same methodology that Margaret had dismissed as unsustainable. When I signed the final documents, I felt a strange combination of triumph and disbelief. 3 years of financial uncertainty, 3 years of family gatherings where I had to justify my career choices, 3 years of wondering if I was being naive about what I could accomplish. All of that was now transformed into vindication. The press release was scheduled to go live Monday morning. For the next 4 days, I would be the only person who knew that everything had changed. Margaret would continue to worry about my lack of real job security. Jessica would continue to navigate the tension between supporting me and managing her mother's concerns. But on Monday morning, when the business news reported that FitTech Industries had acquired Elevate Wellness for $15 million, that entire dynamic would shift permanently. I drove home from the FitTech offices in a daze, carrying documents that proved Margaret had been wrong about everything. The garage where I had filmed thousands of workout videos was about to become the most expensive home gym in Portland's history. That afternoon, I sat in my converted garage office and called Jessica at school. "Can you meet me for coffee after work?" I asked. "I have some news to share." The press release went live at 6 a.m. Pacific time on Monday morning. I was awake to watch it happen, refreshing my phone every few minutes as the story spread across business news sites and social media platforms. FitTech Industries acquires Portland-based Elevate Wellness for $15 million, read the headline in the Portland Business Journal. Local fitness entrepreneur David Chen to lead expanded wellness division. By 8 a.m., my phone was buzzing with notifications every few seconds. LinkedIn messages from former colleagues asking if the David Chen in the headline was the same person they remembered from the advertising agency. Instagram comments from clients congratulating me on the acquisition. Text messages from college friends who had seen the story shared in their local business news. Jessica had known since Thursday evening, when I finally shared the news over dinner at our favorite restaurant. She cried, not from sadness, but from relief and pride, and the sudden realization that all the financial stress we had been carrying could finally be released. "I always believed in what you were building," she said, "but I had no idea it would become something like this." The reaction from our extended family was swift and predictable. Jessica's sister called during her lunch break to confirm that the acquisition story was real. Jessica's aunt left a voicemail expressing how proud the whole family was and how exciting this news felt for everyone. What was conspicuously absent was any communication from Margaret Rodriguez. I knew she had seen the story. Jessica's sister had mentioned that their mother was processing the news and trying to understand what this meant for David's future. But Margaret herself remained completely silent. Tuesday came and went without a word from my mother-in-law. Wednesday afternoon, Jessica mentioned that her mother had asked why Margaret hadn't called to congratulate us yet. Jessica didn't have a good answer because we both knew exactly why she was struggling to respond. For 4 years, Margaret had positioned herself as the practical voice of reason in contrast to my unrealistic ambitions. She had been patient with my delusions, sympathetic about Jessica's situation, and confident that reality would eventually force me to abandon my fitness fantasy and find a real job. Now the dynamic was completely reversed, and everyone in the family was waiting to see how she would handle being so dramatically wrong about something she had been so certain about. Thursday evening, Margaret finally called. I was in my garage office, responding to emails from potential partners who had learned about Elevate Wellness through the acquisition coverage, when her name appeared on my phone screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later, then again before I went to bed. Each time I watched her name appear and disappear without answering. Friday morning, she tried texting. "David, I've been trying to reach you. Could we talk when you have a chance?" I showed the message to Jessica over breakfast. She looked conflicted, like she understood my position but felt torn between her husband and her mother. Saturday afternoon, Margaret showed up at our house unannounced. The knock came at 3 p.m. while Jessica and I were planning our weekend. She answered the door, and I heard Margaret's voice asking if she could come in to talk with both of us. Jessica looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. Avoiding her indefinitely wasn't sustainable, and having this conversation at our place felt better than meeting on her territory. Margaret looked different than I remembered, smaller, more uncertain. She sat on our couch and stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you both an apology," she began. "David, I've been trying to reach you since Monday, and I understand why you haven't returned my calls. I said things about you and your work that were not only wrong, but cruel." It was a stronger opening than I had expected, more direct than her usual approach to difficult conversations. But I waited to see where she would take it. When I saw the news about the acquisition, my first feeling wasn't pride or excitement. It was shame. Shame that I had been so wrong about what you were building, and shame that I had been so dismissive of your efforts. She looked at Jessica, then back at me. "Your wife told me that you heard what I said last Sunday about being a failure, about her deserving better. Those words were unforgivable, and I've been thinking about them all week." "They were unforgivable," I agreed. "But they were also honest. That's really what you thought about me." Margaret flinched. "Yes, that's what I thought. I was wrong, obviously, but I was also wrong in a deeper way. I let my own anxiety about financial security make me cruel to someone my daughter loves." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I built my career in banking, David. I understand real estate and municipal bonds and investment strategies that generate predictable returns. I don't understand technology, and I don't understand social media marketing, and I don't understand how someone can build a multi-million-dollar business around online fitness coaching." "So you assumed it was impossible," I said. "I assumed you were being naive about the risks involved. I thought I was protecting Jessica from disappointment." Jessica had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. "Mom, I appreciate that you're trying to make amends, but David has every right to be angry about this. You spent 4 years treating him like he wasn't good enough for me." "I know," Margaret said, "and I know that apologizing now after he's proven me wrong so dramatically probably seems convenient, like I'm only changing my opinion because of the money." "That's exactly what it seems like," I said. Margaret was quiet for a minute, then asked, "What would you need from me to believe that my apology is genuine?" It was a fair question, and I thought about it seriously. The truth was, I didn't need Margaret's approval, or even her respect. Her opinion of me had been wrong for 4 years, and it would probably be wrong in different ways going forward. But I needed her to understand that her dismissal had been personal, not just professional. I need you to understand that you weren't just wrong about Elevate Wellness, I said. You were wrong about who I am and what I'm capable of, and I need you to treat Jessica's judgment with more respect going forward. Margaret nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. I disrespected both of you, and I did it consistently for 4 years. I don't have a good excuse for that. The conversation continued for another hour. Margaret asked genuine questions about how I had built Elevate Wellness, about the technology behind my coaching platform, and about my plans for working with FitTech Industries. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed actually curious about my work, rather than just politely tolerant of it. I realize now that I never really tried to understand what you were building, she said. I made assumptions based on my own limitations, not based on what you were actually accomplishing. It was true, and it was probably the closest thing to a real apology I was going to get. Margaret wasn't someone who admitted mistakes easily, and this conversation had clearly been difficult for her. When she left that afternoon, Jessica and I talked about what came next. The immediate crisis had passed, but our relationship with her family would need time to normalize. Margaret had spent 4 years positioning herself as the voice of reason in contrast to my unrealistic ambitions. Now that dynamic was reversed and everyone would need to adjust. I think she learned something important today, Jessica said. Not just about being wrong, but about making assumptions based on limited information. Maybe, I said, but I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine now just because she apologized. Trust takes time to rebuild. Jessica nodded. I don't expect you to pretend anything. I just hope you can both move forward from this. Over the next few weeks, Margaret called regularly but not excessively. She left voicemails about family gatherings and asked thoughtful questions about my transition to FitTech Industries. Her tone was different now, more respectful, but also more careful, like she was trying to rebuild a relationship she had damaged. I returned her calls when I felt like it and ignored them when I didn't, not out of spite, but because I was genuinely busy with the acquisition transition, and because I didn't feel obligated to make her guilt easier to manage. The real test came 6 weeks later when Margaret asked if we would be comfortable hosting Christmas dinner at her house, given everything that had happened. Jessica and I agreed, partly because avoiding family gatherings wasn't sustainable, and partly because I was curious to see how she would handle our first extended interaction since the acquisition. Margaret was gracious without being overly deferential. She asked about my work at FitTech Industries and listened to my answers like they actually mattered to her. When other family members brought up the acquisition, she expressed genuine pride instead of the careful neutrality I had expected. The most telling moment came when Margaret's neighbor stopped by to drop off a holiday card. Margaret introduced me as my son-in-law David, who just sold his fitness coaching company to FitTech Industries for $15 million. The introduction was proud, specific, and completely different from how she had talked about me 6 months earlier. 6 months after the acquisition, FitTech Industries promoted me to Senior Director of Digital Wellness and announced that our coaching platform had become their fastest-growing product division. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and additional equity, but more importantly, it validated everything I had been trying to build since starting Elevate Wellness. Margaret read about the promotion in the Portland Business Journal and called immediately to congratulate me. Her excitement seemed genuine, not forced, like she had genuinely become invested in my success, rather than just trying to repair her own reputation. I've been telling everyone about your promotion, she said. My book club, my neighbors, even my financial advisor. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. It was a nice sentiment, but I found myself thinking about how different this conversation would have been 4 years earlier. Back then, Margaret wouldn't have understood why a promotion at a tech company mattered, or why digital wellness was worth caring about. Her pride now felt genuine, but it also felt conditional on external validation that shouldn't have been necessary. I appreciate that, I said. Though I should mention that the work itself hasn't changed much. I'm still developing coaching programs for people who want to get healthier. I just have more resources and a bigger team now. But now you're doing it as a senior director at a major company, Margaret said. That has to feel different. It feels good, I admitted, but mostly because I get to keep working on problems I care about, not because of the title. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I think I understand that now. I used to think that job security and prestigious titles were the most important things. But watching what you built made me realize that finding meaningful work matters more than I thought. It was probably the closest Margaret would ever come to admitting that her entire framework for evaluating professional success had been limited. She was learning slowly that there were different ways to build a valuable career. "Jessica told me you're thinking about starting another company eventually," she said. "Maybe in a few years," I said. "After I finish my commitment to fit tech industries, there are other problems in the wellness space that I think technology could solve." "Well, you'll have my support this time," Margaret said. "And my apologies again for not supporting you the first time." 2 years after the acquisition, Jessica and I bought a house in Southeast Portland with a real home office where I could work when I wasn't at the fit tech headquarters. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable in ways our old apartment had never been, with space for the life we were building together. Margaret and I had developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. She stopped offering career advice and started asking genuine questions about the wellness industry. I stopped expecting her to understand my professional choices and started appreciating her willingness to learn from her mistakes. The dynamic at family gatherings changed completely. Instead of deflecting questions about my fitness hobby, I found myself explaining emerging trends in digital health to relatives who were actually interested in the answers. Margaret would introduce me to her friends as an expert in wellness technology, and her pride felt earned rather than obligatory. Last month, Margaret called to ask if I wanted to meet for coffee and discuss a technology problem she was having with her property management software. It was the first time she had ever asked for my professional advice, and it felt like the completion of a long, complicated process of learning to see each other clearly. "I should have asked for your help years ago," she said, when we met at the coffee shop near our house. "You weren't ready years ago," I said, "but you're ready now." We spent an hour discussing database optimization and user interface design, and Margaret listened like my opinions actually mattered to her, not because I had proven myself through external success, but because she had finally learned to value expertise over assumptions. Driving home, I thought about that Sunday lunch 4 years earlier, about standing on Margaret's patio and hearing her explain why I was destined to fail. The memory didn't make me angry anymore, but it reminded me why earning respect felt more satisfying than demanding it. Some people needed time to recognize what they couldn't see immediately, and some victories were worth waiting for.